Darwin's theory of evolution, and as a byproduct of that, evolutionary psychology, have taught us an unbelievable amount about human nature and the animal kingdom as a whole. But there are some unanswered questions, mainly circulating around why did certain traits evolve when they don't seem to in any way, shape, or form enhance our survival. In some cases, they can even decrease our survival rates. For example, take a peacock. A peacock's tail, which is huge, colorful, and ultimately just a bright target on the back of every single peacock alive, doesn't really make any evolutionary sense. Like, why would peacocks evolve these massive, flamboyant, colorful targets that just make them more obvious to their prey? Now, the answer is actually quite interesting, and it can actually be tied back to the evolutionary inputs and the occurrence of both happiness and depression in humans, which again doesn't seem to make a lot of inherent sense as to why we've evolved these traits. Like, why would we evolve traits like depression that really make us lethargic, low motivation, low dominance, and ultimately that make us recess in our social environments? It just doesn't make any evolutionary sense. But there is an evolutionary reason. And that evolutionary reason is because we don't just have the theory of selection, right? Which is really the survivability of these evolved traits and how they help us enhance our survival. We also have the theory of sexual selection, which is essentially we evolve certain traits to increase our sexual desirability so that we're able to pass on our genes, and then our genes pass on genes, and that really flows forward. So there is, of course, natural selection, which is like survivability, but like you said, we have the sexual selection aspect as well, which is why peacocks evolved their bright tails, because it makes them more desirable to female peacocks. When you think about it, the bigger and more colorful and flamboyant a peacock's tail is, and the fact that they're still alive, like those two things pairing side by side means that that peacock has been able, although it's a massive target, to still survive. So it has these traits of survivability, but it's also more attractive, right? So there's those two playing in tandem. Now, I want to talk about how this ties in with happiness and depression and the evolutionary psychology of happiness and depression. So what I want to run you through here is what is known as the sociometer. Now, the sociometer is essentially a feedback mechanism that humans have to determine their social value and thus their sexual value. So essentially how this works is that as humans, we take certain actions. Those actions are either going to represent virtuous behaviors or unvirtuous behaviors, behaviors that people deem as admirable or unadmirable. So essentially, these actions influence the perception that others have of us and the perception that we have of ourselves. And this has two effects. Firstly, the perception that others have of us is going to influence our social status or social value, which is the perception of other people towards us. Now, people think that this means social dominance, and sure, that's an element of it, but what I really want you to think of here is actually more social value and your ability to contribute something to your community, whether that is strengths like courage and leadership, or even traits like humor and entertainment. Like, these are both virtuous traits in different ways, even like things like trust and honesty, for example. Now, on the other side of the coin, these actions will influence our perception of ourself or our self-esteem or self-value. So essentially, the actions that we take are at the root of how we perceive ourselves, because our actions, whether virtuous or unvirtuous or admirable or unadmirable, will influence how we see ourselves, okay? On the other end of the spectrum, it'll influence how others see us. And this also works in like a feedback loop. So our social status or value will influence our self-esteem or self-value, and that will also influence how we show up and thus our social status and value. Now, what I want you to understand here is that our happiness is directly proportionate. So if I say this is happiness, oh, this is tough. Happiness is directly proportionate to our self-esteem. Now, why? Why would our happiness be directly tied to our self-esteem? So essentially, it would look something like, if I can get my text up, this. But why is this the case? This is the case because our self-esteem is our sociometer. How we feel about ourselves is, for the most part, going to be a reflection of how we are perceived by others. And this is important because how we're perceived by others is going to determine our ability to reproduce. Again, sexual value and the theory of sexual selection. So the higher our self-esteem, the higher our social value is ultimately going to be, and vice versa. Now, the opposite of this would be depression, right? So essentially, the lower our self-esteem, the lower our social value. And this goes both ways. You can have high social value and high self-esteem and be happy and then the next minute depressed, or you can go the other way. And what really determines this are the virtuous behaviors that you take and display. Now, this doesn't always involve other people. For example, being generous and displaying generous actions doesn't always have to be seen by other people to increase your self-esteem. If you take virtuous and admirable actions behind the scenes and you're able to perceive those actions as virtuous, then it will increase your self-esteem. And the reason that this has an influence on our level of happiness is because happiness or depression, and that spectrum of happiness, is ultimately our feedback mechanism to let us know how we are performing and how virtuous our actions are, and whether or not our actions are going to increase or decrease our social status. So essentially, happiness is the feedback mechanism to tell us whether or not our actions are aligned with the best actions that they can be for both ourselves and for the people around us, or if they're not. So if you are someone who is or has experienced depression, the reason that you're experiencing it is because you are taking actions that you do not deem as virtuous and that other people do not deem as virtuous. Whether that's laziness and you are playing video games all day and not going to the gym, if you're being dishonest and lying to people or using dishonest business strategies, or anything of the sort, you're displaying actions that display traits that are not admirable, then you will decrease your level of happiness. On the other hand, on the contrary, if you take admirable actions and display admirable traits, if you are honest and trustworthy, if you are hardworking, if you are, entertaining or humorous, if you are any of these things, you will increase your self-esteem and thus increase your happiness, and as a byproduct, increase your social value and thus your sexual market value. Okay? So this is the evolutionary psychology of happiness and depression. In summary, it's directly tied to your self-esteem, and your self-esteem lives in a feedback loop with your social value or social status. So if you want to increase your level of happiness, you have to look at the first order consequence, which are your actions, and you have to start taking more virtuous actions. You have to start living with more integrity, with more discipline, and with all the different traits that people deem as admirable. Because not only will others deem it as admirable and will it increase your social value, it'll also increase your self-worth and your self-esteem and your self-value and thus your happiness. Okay? So that is it. I want to keep this brief. If you enjoyed, don't forget to subscribe, check the link below, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.